Thank you. Hang on one second. I think Secretary Young, you're on mute or something, because I can't hear you. Oh no, one of these days we can't hear you for some reason. Something's going on with audio today, Secretary Young. If you want to mess around with that audio, I'm happy to just sort of kick off the meeting while you solve that. We can give that one more minute.
While we're waiting for her to figure out audio, can I request like a minute or two on the agenda, either at the end or if I don't see any like other business sections, so I would be unsure where to jump in if it's at the beginning or the end. Just let me know.
Let's do it towards the end, Lauren, but I'm making a note right now that you need a couple minutes. Okay. All right. I don't know. For whatever reason, we can't hear you, Secretary Young. So one of these technological things you want to sign back on for. Perfect. Okay. So let's get going. This is a meeting of the steering committee, the Vermont Climate Council. Thanks everybody for joining. We have a quorum. What day is it? July 22nd. I put in the chat and I'll repost it in the chat again if you just joined our agenda today. As we often do, we try to do an approval of just making sure we're okay with our agenda and then approval of the minutes. The agenda is, as you can see, we're going to spend a better part of a half hour talking about what will happen on Monday at the Climate Council meeting. We really want to make sure we're setting ourselves up for a successful meeting. We also, however, want to spend time to talk about public and stakeholder engagement timelines and actions. We have more detail from Rising Climate Access. We've been thinking about this a little bit more. So there's a few things to say. Jane wants to say some things there. And we also, related to that, want to talk about our meeting schedule and the sort of meeting schedule going forward. And Jane has some proposals there. We want to take public comment. Lauren, you've got something you want to jump in on the agenda as well towards the end and other business. So that's what we're planning on doing. Any questions or concerns about our agenda today? And we still don't have Secretary. Well, at least you can hear us. I don't know what, why don't you switch to phone audio? There's that option down by the mute button, the little arrow, the up arrow, it says switch to phone audio. And then you call into one of those numbers. And add in both numbers, the meeting ID and your participant ID, and that way you're connected to two. Any concerns about our agenda right now for us? We good? Okay. Great. We have linked in the agenda the meeting minutes from our last meeting. They are posted. I'll give everybody a second just to click through if you want to click through if you haven't already. And those minutes are there. Are there any concerns people have had about those minutes that you want to raise up? Is anybody uncomfortable approving those minutes right now? Any concerns with approving the minutes? Wonderful. Okay, so we will consider those minutes to be approved. Thanks so much. All right, so let's jump into the thick of it here, which is our meeting that's coming up on Monday. And we've been doing some thinking about the structure for that meeting. And there's a link in the agenda to a Microsoft Word document, which is our latest agenda for that, a draft agenda. And what I thought would be helpful is just to talk for a moment about the logic of it. And then let's see if the structure is working for the logic and the intent we're trying to achieve. All right. So as you'll see in that document, and I'm happy to share it on my screen as well as we're talking here. It is linked, like I mentioned, it's linked in the agenda, but let me just go ahead and share that. There we go. Okay.
David, before you start, I'm testing. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you sound loud and clear. Thank you. Sorry about that mix up.
No, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so if you see for these 3 bullet points at the top of the agenda for Monday for the council, we're really trying to do 3 things. One is, this is our first opportunity for the full council to look across and see what these 3 subcommittees have been doing in terms of, and we're going to change the wordings from recommendations to pathways and strategies. Just get rid of the, all right, it's our first opportunity to talk about draft pathways and strategies, and if there are any actions to highlight, maybe some as well. So we're giving the 3 subcommittees this chance to show to each other, this is what we've been up to. And this is as far as we've gotten in our initial work. Then we need to have a discussion about how this is coming together. And I have some framing questions that Jane and Marion and I with Pat Field have talked about, and I'll show those to you in just a second. But we do want to, more than just do a sort of dump of each subcommittee's work on the council, we want to have that pause to say, what are we seeing here? Are there sort of substantive gaps at a high level that we recognize now that need to be addressed? Are there pieces that need to be consolidated across the groups? Are there things that maybe even in cross purposes? So we want to have that moment to talk about it. And then we also want to make sure everybody leaves the meeting on Monday clear about what happens now. What are the next steps for the subcommittees and the council? And how is this all going to play out in the coming months? So those are the 3 bullets that we're trying to achieve in this meeting. And before I show what our idea is on how to achieve it, I just want to test, do those seem like the right 3 bullets for what we want to get out of this meeting on Monday? Does that feel right, Jared?
I think those look great. I would just offer, and I'd look to others who are just part of the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee as well to comment on this. It feels like where things have ended up is that the overview is mostly on draft pathways and strategies, but not really at the level of action, certainly not in a kind of comprehensive way. There may be some kind of actions or action type things that get mentioned in passing, but it feels like the more comprehensive focus is pathways and strategies. But then on that second one, I do think that it is valuable and important to include pathways, strategies, and actions in terms of the discussion about how all of that comes together in the plan, even if we're not going to have a big focus on the actions in the meeting. We know that come.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess quick reaction to that, Jared, and I see other hands, but my quick reaction is absolutely. And then on the second one, I don't know whether we're going to talk so much about actions in the second bullet, but on the third bullet, we're going to talk about how we get to actions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I was thinking not discussing specific actions, but like the process for how pathways, strategies, and then the actions to come will more the process than the content of incorporating those.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Great. Secretary Moore.
Yeah, thanks. I just wonder, and it's probably building off of what I understood Jared to be saying too. I almost think the clarifying next steps for the council and subcommittees needs to be the second item. And that it's not clear to me, and I'm hopeful we're going to discuss today, how we are going to look to the council to provide feedback on the strategies coming out of the presentations we'll receive on Monday, and having that come before thinking about what I see as a follow-on step of starting to build out actions and form them into the action plan. It feels important.
Okay. So I wonder maybe the way this is phrased is causing some confusion, right? Because I feel like, Julie, I feel like there's a flow in my mind of presenting the draft pathways and strategies, these initial pathways and strategies, having some clarifying questions on the back end, and then having this discussion about big picture in the pathways and strategies. Are there big gaps? Are there overlaps? Are there things that, aren't really in sync with each other? And then after all that, to say, okay, we know the next stage is refining all this, getting to actions. That's the third bullet. So that's sort of the flow in my mind. I don't know.
I guess, so maybe it's an intermediary step where it's not clear to me what the council's role is at this point in terms of reacting to what we hear on Monday.
Got it. Okay. Thanks. Chris?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just having been in a cross-sector meeting too, based on the various task teams that they had, one of the things that was coming out was, there was a discussion on specific pathways, but then they kept coming up these broad issue areas, right? And that may be something that I don't know if it's necessarily an additional budget. I'm sorry, additional bullet.
Yeah.
But it could, where we say begin a discussion about how these strategies may come together into Vermont's climate action plan. I think there's also, in there, begin identifying, which issues or which topics are specific to the subcommittees and what are the overarching issues that we're beginning to identify.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Jared, but how do you feel? What's your thoughts on that? And then Lauren, most of us were in that last meeting, so
Right. So just to be clear, real quick, while we're talking about this, I'm just going to scroll down on the screen here. These were the three questions, sort of in addition to any clarifying questions we would have on the back end of the presentations, to force a sort of a higher level look across everything we just heard from those three subcommittees and do these types of questions, right? Which kind of gets at what you're saying, Chris, but I'm not sure it's actually nailing it.
Yeah, they're not necessarily missing. I mean, I think we're starting to identify them. So maybe there's a fourth bullet even is what issues keep coming up, thinking broad scale that need to be addressed, across subcommittees, then what might be missing.
Right. I wonder if this second bullet is the first and it's different. It's like, it's more what you're trying to say, Chris, right? Of what's really emerging as core things that may be cutting across and it's going to require some consolidated treatment kind of thing. Is that what you're saying?
It could be. I'm almost thinking, what I'm getting hung up in my mind, I'm seeing another parenthetical there that says some of which are going to be very broad scale. But that's just when my brain works, which.
Okay.
There could be some key emerging issues that I'm just thinking that are fairly narrow, but there are also going to be some that are very broad, if that makes sense, just based on what I've heard. You don't necessarily have to call that out. I'm just thinking about, I'm already kind of jumping ahead, thinking about how we address those. So.
Okay. Thanks. We can tighten this up, make it look pretty, but I think I'm starting to hear what you're saying and trying to get at, because what we're hoping is that there's some reflection that looks across that full package, and it's not just like very specific points of feedback. It's more sort of general high level feedback, thinking about where we're at. Jane?
Yeah, thank you. I think that I was going to first and foremost elevate the three guiding questions for this meeting, and then also speak to what I think I hear Secretary Moore alluding to, and I suspect Lauren might bring up too, and Lauren after me can clarify if I'm getting this right. But we're also thinking about when and how the council provides feedback and the role of the council specifically on elevating certain pathways, strategies for further consideration, discussion, and that component of I don't like the word prioritization, but for lack of a better word, prioritization of strategies for further development and inclusion in the plan. And I just want to articulate that as we talk about next steps, we're going to talk about that. And David and Marion and I have been thinking about how best to do that. And I would just actually call to attention that in the conversation, I want everybody to agree with me on the steering committee with this. I do not think that this meeting is where we're going to start to do that yet. This is an identification and presentation of the work of the subcommittees to date. We're going to talk about it in a few minutes. So as we talk about what the next steps will look like and how we're going to get to that through development at the next steering committee with the co-chairs around a discussion around evaluation or prioritization of strategies and recommendations, and then in real time start to vet that with the council and how that looks with first and foremost cross-sector mitigation actions, and then further down the line of ag and ecosystems and rural resilience as we pull together things in the fall. But I'll let Lauren speak to that too, because I imagine that's what she's thinking about also and how she thinks about it and others. And then also just suggest that we'll have more conversation about this later on today's agenda too.
Thanks, Jane. Lauren?
Well, I think it's safe to say that Jane's got like a metronome or something going on based on that like consistent clicking that we're hearing. But Jane, I heard everything you said, just that was kind of like background noise. So yeah, I'm agreeing with Jane, Chris's, and Julie's points, and might offer up a potential solution that I was actually hoping to present maybe at the end, but this seems to be a perfect time to just kind of, since all of these issues are coming up and they continue to come up across the different subcommittees, that or recommend, as these recommendations are being elevated to the full council, recognition that the public participation process is ramping up. I think it would be really helpful to create a small cross-cutting group of counselors with Jane and Marion involved too, to help guide the plan writing and development process. I think that would aid in both the name of co-creation, which has kind of been thematic across this process, but also not to place the full burden on state staff. I think it would also help ID these cross-cutting themes that we keep hearing. We just talked about them quite a bit in cross-sector. They've certainly come up in between rural resilience and ag and ecosystems, and also that they would improve some of the consistency between the subcommittees, since we're seeing some pretty significant differences in how we're approaching both our process, but also pathways and strategies to date. Chris and I have talked about this a little bit, since I wanted to pick his brain on it being a planning professional, which I am not. And are hoping that we can get on the next steering committee agenda to kind of propose a recommended structure and purpose for this like smaller group of people. And I think our next steering committee meeting is in 2 weeks or so. But Chris, I'll just turn it over to you to see if I've dropped anything or if you want to amend anything that I've said.
No, I think it's great. And I can just tell you, like in our part of our practice as a regional commission, and not only here, I mean, other jurisdictions where I've worked in Maryland, New York, and other places, is it really helps to have, a committee of commissioners or counselors or whatever, to provide feedback to the staff. It also kind of helps keep the in our case the counselors kind of remembering that the burden is ultimately on the counselors, not the staff, to pull together the report and have responsibility for it. So I think it's a really good idea. It's pretty common practice, and I do think it would help give the staff who are going to have a lot on their plates, and the consultants, however all this is going to come together. I think it's a good idea. So
can I ask a question on that, Chris and Lauren? And because we have some groups set up, right? We've got you guys as the steering committee. We've got the steering committee plus the co-chairs group, which meets every other time. Why would those groups, you all, not be that group? Are you thinking of something smaller than that? What's the vision there?
I'll just throw out that it requires a group that's actually got the time to do the reading and do the work, and that may not be necessary. Maybe it's the steering committee or a subset, but it's got to be people who can really take the time to put that kind of time into it. That's I can just tell you in my experience, that's one of the key determinants of who's on that group. Not just somebody to bounce things off of, but people who can actually kind of do that reading. But that's my thinking. Well, Lauren, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree, and just support something Chris said earlier, that it provides an opportunity for the counselors who are ultimately responsible for creating and signing off on this plan to have a bit more more opportunity to engage early on and plan drafting and development to identify those cross-cutting themes, make sure that we're not missing anything or being too redundant. And yeah, to Jane's point in the chat, not to fully discuss this at today's meeting, but an idea that Chris and I had and wanted to present at a future subcommittee meeting, or steering committee meeting rather.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. So circling back to this meeting.
David?
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
please.
This is Suzanne. I'm not sure if you can see me. And again, I don't have the hand function, which I've had somebody working on for a couple of weeks. I just don't get it with this version. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know I agree with Jane. This is a big topic, and I agree with your question. I was going to ask it myself, David, is what had we intended moving forward? Didn't we have a contractor lined up or some plan for the drafting? So I think it's a good conversation to bring to the next steering committee meeting to really fully vet.
Great.
You know, do we need it? And if we do, what will their job be? So thank you.
So yeah, thank you. And we need to provide next steps. You'll see even in this agenda, there's a section here around next steps, like what should the counselors and subcommittees expect going forward? And I think Jane's been putting some thoughts on paper about that and plans to present those tomorrow, and probably wants to show them to you today. So you get some thoughts like what we would be saying to the council on Monday. Before we go that, I just want to circle back on how we're handling the presenting of these draft pathways and strategies, and then the conversation we want to create on the back end of that. Just to go into a tiny bit more detail, and then I'll quick grab your hand in 1 second, Jared. The way we've structured this agenda, in addition to having our now standard sort of just transitions, reflection, inspiration with someone who Secretary Moore really had a positive experience with, then we would do a block of rural resilience and ag and ecosystems, each being asked to present for 15 minutes and then have some clarifying questions and discussions on the back end for 15 minutes each. And then take a break and come back and have cross-sector, because cross-sector was saddled with quite a few sectors, give cross-sector a little bit more time to do all their sectors. So there would be up to 30 minutes of presentation, which is actually moving quite quickly with 8 minutes or so for each task lead. And then some discussion, and then going and leaving time, though, really leaving a solid amount of time for these sort of overarching questions and looking across the different groups. So we don't get sucked into too much like everybody's little detail comment on every pathway or strategy, and more a higher level conversation about what we're seeing. So I just want to pause on that and say, does that feel right? And how could we change that? I don't know, Jared, if your hand was going somewhere else, or if it matches what I'm asking for right now.
I think it relates, but it's earlier in the agenda, and assuming we're going chronologically, I just wanted to ask that question quickly, and if we want to come back to it and stick at this point, that's fine. I guess my question is just, I'm trying to think about the agenda through the lens of the experience of not just counselors and folks who've been engaging in the process, like on the subcommittees, but also it feels like an increasing number of members of the public who are joining. And so one of the questions I had for you, Jane, is, are you planning to, and if not, do you think it would be helpful to upfront, before we kind of just dive right into the pathways and strategies by task group, set some just context around the statutory charge and in the criteria just upfront, like this is what these pathways and strategies are designed around, because it's just, I just wonder about, if there's a possibility of some folks getting lost if we dive right into those without just a little bit of context on the statute and the targets and criteria.
Thanks, Jared. And I see Secretary Young, Young, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jared. I was thinking along the same lines when we started this conversation of reorienting. I know we have a slide that basically, or a couple of slides already in a deck that basically lay out the statutory charge, you know, and what the Climate Council is supposed to achieve and the path forward to achieving it, you know, create the inventory, to examine strategies. And it might be really helpful from my vantage point. I think I agree with you. If I were a member of the public just diving into this, you know, it's without context. So I could fully support a brief overview of the Global Warming Solution Act and what we're doing.
Yeah, thanks. And I jumped right over that. It is intentional that there will be part from Jane. And Jane, you can mention whether what you're hearing right now makes you think about how you would structure that introduction. But that's absolutely the thought, that Jane would provide some overarching intro slides. I don't know, Jane, you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, thanks. My overarching slides do not get into they get into the process around the development of pathway strategies and strategies for the sake of each sectoral presentation, and some background around that. At the beginning of each sectoral pathway presentation, there is a statement around their statutory requirement, and if a statutory requirement specifically doesn't exist, like outside of emissions reductions, they're supposed to speak to their vision or goal around how this work was framed. And so I'm more than happy, though, that, like, hearing from all of you to incorporate at the very least an overarching slide about the GWSA requirements, but would have to coordinate how that's done, mindful of how the other presentations have been put together specifically around the sectors and the GWSA requirements. So if it's missing, I do also want to just reflect on, as we think about next steps from these presentations, this is like the first shot at putting them out to the public, and there is a process that Marion and I are proposing about what we'll do with these presentations after they are put forward to the Climate Council, because the intent is to package my opening slides up front with every single sectoral pathway or subcommittee presentation, so that each one of them could be standalone presentations for the public to take off of the website, and then to be handed off to the consultants to consider for how they put a larger package together for communication as a tool for the public engagement next phase of that with the forums in September. So, but I'm mindful of what you just suggested, and we'll consider how to put it into my slides. But if we don't get it right on Monday, there'll be that should be a comment and feedback of how we put it all together.
That's great. Jane, there is something really weird with your sound today. I don't know what's going on. You might want to just try to call in again if you want to just take a second to do that, because we definitely need you like on full audio right now to do this next piece. Okay, so just to, I'm conscious of time. We want to talk about the sort of next steps and what's happening with public engagement and all that stuff. In terms of the overall flow, then, are we feeling comfortable that this agenda is doing what we want it to do by having our just transition moment, having Jane give us this introduction that sets us up for the subcommittees to give rather short presentations? And I will just say, we know that there's a lot more material that the subcommittees could present. And what we're asking is to give it this sort of higher level view of where they've gotten to. And also thinking that if we're going to have a bunch of these presentations, it needs to be digestible for everybody who's there. So that's why it's relatively short, even knowing that each of the subcommittees probably could spend a lot more time if we gave them that time. So we do that, and then we have this moment of reflection looking across all of them with questions that are like the ones we have here. Okay, and then the final piece is into a next steps conversation. Jared, is that a fresh hand?
Yeah, sorry, just really quickly, I really appreciated what you said earlier, David, about the time that's set aside for discussion is relatively short, given the amount of content that will be gone over. And so it'll be most helpful to have questions and comments at a high level and of a certain type. And so I'm just wondering if it would be useful to help signal that kind of higher level feedback and the types of questions that would be most helpful at this point, whether or not we can do some more signaling of that in the agenda rather than just saying discussion as the bullet point. Because I think when people see discussion, they might think, well, any kind of question or minor, it would just be a question. Is there a way to signal the type of feedback, the type of questions we want to have in those periods of time that beyond just discussion?
Yeah. I like that a lot, Jared. And the other thing that I would typically do in something like this is I would have a shared Google Doc or something that people can drop more specific comments on if they have them. And it's an outlet for people to put in detail that we just don't have time to do verbally. So we will likely have that. I'll say we will have that as something that the council members can add to. Okay. Any other comments on this agenda before we go to our next piece? Just feeling like we're going to hit the mark. Just notice that we're taking a little bit more than our normal time. It's a long meeting as it is, but we'll probably run into 12:45 and run over a little bit, a normal 12:30 meeting. I think we booked it through 1, Jane, right, on the invite. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. And we are giving a more significant break. We'll give a 15-minute break in the middle here so people can really take time. Lauren?
I just want to make sure, this is Jane looking at you, and this is still a remote meeting, right? This is not an in-person. Okay.
Yeah. That's a whole other set of questions because everybody's eager to figure out a way to do this in person. Okay. All right. So let me stop sharing this. Thanks everybody for the really helpful feedback on that. I think we're in a good place. The next thing we wanted to talk about right here was around public and stakeholder engagement timelines and actions, and also about sort of a meeting schedule going forward. So all this is about sort of the forward-looking piece. And Jane, I'm not quite sure, did you want to essentially preview the slides or some of the slides that you would give to the council on Monday? Is that what you'd want to do right now as a way of talking about this? Was your head somewhere else?
Do I sound better now or no?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
You solved it.
I'm not going to preview all the slides because that would take too much time.
Right.
But I was going to share 2 slides. Would that have to do
Perfect.
with the next steps component? Because I'd love your feedback, and the public engagement timeline, and then we can transition to the meeting conversation.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So as part of the opening presentation, and this is a question for all of you, I want to talk through some of these next steps for subcommittees that we'd like to propose, but I'd also ask maybe I might not use this at the end of my opening slides, but hold this for later in the agenda when Secretary Young and I speak to next steps at the end. But for now, I did just want to share with you that I have this slide which gets to consideration of the work for the subcommittees for the month of August, largely to speak to the process that will unfold and the work expected of different subcommittees coming up. So first and foremost, it highlights where we're at. It's really an amazing milestone, to say the least, of putting forward the package of pathways and strategies. And Marion and I's intent with the help of CBI will be to help take thoughtful notes during the meeting. And I want to make that clear. And so perhaps I probably should do this at the beginning to make clear for subcommittee members as well as council members that they should really, lean into the meeting and not worry about, notes and feedback. That's something that CBI staff will help us consolidate for Marion and I then to use to both share with the subcommittees, for subcommittees themselves to hear and gather and reflect on specific feedback around their work to date, as well as for Marion and I then to use to work with subcommittees on identifying gaps and the cross-cutting issues and how we was moving. Whoa. That was not my audio. How we propose moving that forward. So that will happen the week after the Climate Council, with the expectation then during the first week of August at the Wednesday through Friday regularly scheduled subcommittee meetings, we can help facilitate those conversations at the subcommittee levels and think about process for how we elevate those cross-cutting issues and start to work on them across subcommittees. I also wanted to recognize that during that first week of August, there's been a lot of work and planning around stakeholder engagement at the cross-sector level with respect to the mitigation pathways, but there hasn't been a real thoughtful process around stakeholder engagement with ag and ecosystems and rural resilience and adaptation. And we intend to help facilitate those conversations to identify key stakeholder groups that we want to reach out to during the month of August and into September for those subcommittees, if that's needed, to test specific strategies and potentially actions to get feedback on. Also during the month of August, I think it'll be a really critical time for subcommittees to be thinking about quantifiable or measurable goals if they would like to put that forward out of ag and ecosystems and rural resilience. And it, also even across cross-sector, thinking about how we craft the narrative and the vision for all three of those subcommittees' work, particularly related to sequestration, resiliency, adaptation, as well as mitigation, and how we speak to that as components of the climate action plan. Let's see if I'm missing anything. And then we're going to also obviously be diving into the stakeholder engagement specifically for cross-sector during the month of August. So before I move into the public engagement and the sort of feedback that I've gotten to date on public engagement and the revisions we've made to their timelines, I'd like to just pause here and just suggest if this all is sitting right as next steps for the month of August with you all, and any feedback that we should consider before this goes out on Monday as part of the presentation.
This is Suzanne, in case you can't see me. I have my hand up, my real hand.
Okay.
The July 26th bullet, just for my own edification as I compare it to the meeting objectives, which David had put up. Yours on this slide says presentation of draft pathways and strategy examples. And so I'm construing that as this is just going, that sounds like it's a presentation from subcommittees, examples of what our draft pathways could be in the future. David's, the agenda that we're looking at says provide an overview of draft recommendations. So I'm just hoping that we can have some consistency between those two, because they seem a little bit inconsistent, at least the way the words that are being used.
Appreciate that, Secretary. Yeah. I don't want to cut you off.
And then my second reaction, I'll just start out. My reaction is it's sitting well with me. Depending on what we see on Monday, 4 days to digest, to make meaningful, give meaningful feedback. Seems very like a very short time. But again, maybe I'm not understanding what we're going to see on Monday.
Okay, thank you for that. So first off, I just to communicate the, and David and I will make sure it's consistent, but that this is a full suite of pathways that's expected to be out of the subcommittees. And then it's, the strategies will not be comprehensive that are presented. They're intended to be examples of strategies under each pathway that are illustrative of those pathways and illuminate what they're getting at with the pathway. And so that's my misstep perhaps in language here. And I just meant to suggest that the pathways could still be nuanced across the subcommittees by using draft, but it'll be a full package there. And then I do think that with respect to feedback, it'll be largely consolidated in the way the minutes are taken from that meeting in more detail perhaps than normally they are, as well as thinking about feedback around where we're seeing answers to the questions that are being proposed to the council at that meeting. And I suspect that could be a fairly quick turnaround, and in all honesty needs to be in order to keep things moving along for subcommittees.
And I guess I get that. My real concern is if we're all seeing something for the first time, you know, and we're not on the subcommittee that's presenting, then what I think I just heard you say is you're expecting council feedback right away at that meeting after the first, you know, run through, that you're going to consolidate and bring back to the subcommittees for consideration. It's not going to be, I'm going to have an ability to take time with these slides and really look at them and ask questions on another meeting.
So others should help jump in here, but we do not expect the pathways and strategies that are put forward on these slides to change significantly at this time, that this is how they will go out for public engagement. And the time for vetting them substantively will be to come for inclusion in the climate action plan by the council.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks.
Right. That, yeah, I would second what Jane just said. We're looking for, you know, immediate reaction in that high level analysis in real time at the meeting, so that we're in a place where we can send stuff out in public for some initial public engagement, and we just get some initial like high level feedback. There will be a whole process starting September into October of really doing a council vetting and conversation around these issues. Okay. Jane, next slide, maybe, just so I'm conscious of time.
So there was a lot of feedback around the public engagement timeline that was presented to the steering committee last week. A lot of discussion, and I heard some significant concerns around the timing of certain components of it. We've been working with the consultants as well as considering CBI support in addition to Climate Access and RISE in order to think about how some components can be moved in timeline and or provide real-time feedback to the subcommittees to inform their drafting. So first, I just want to say that we received the public engagement plan in writing on Wednesday of this week. A&R staff, as well as David, was privy to that document, and we're providing written feedback to the Climate Access and RISE by tomorrow at the end of the day for them to include in iterations of their plan. We are expecting to have a PDF of the public engagement plan by next Wednesday, as well as a survey to target folks' review and questions that will roll out to the council and subcommittees in the middle of next week, so that there'll be more opportunity for the council and subcommittees to comment on this. But for now, just to communicate with all of you the timeline, and I'll just, for the sake of time right now, highlight components that we've worked to shift or redesign a bit to get more feedback earlier. We're thinking about stakeholder events happening in August and into September, and these will really be supported by CBI and not by Climate Access and RISE, although they will be informing the engagement that they summarize later in September and into October. These are the ones that we're doing in concert with the Public Service Department, as well as perhaps facilitating our own in the name of Ag and Ecosystems and Rural Resilience and Adaptation. Those stakeholder events, we expect to be able to summarize and provide review of them back to the subcommittees. We haven't finalized this with CBI staff yet, but within a week, I would imagine, of real-time summaries back to folks so that they can be using that to inform their actions development and refining their strategies. We're also thinking about, as folks have heard, these statewide and regional events really being led by Climate Access and RISE, 3 of which will be online and 4 of which will be in-person events. These will really be the focus, the center. We're starting to think about them as of that broad public engagement. And that's what all of the feedback is really going to be focused in and around. That's where the messaging is going to be crafted. That's where we're going to package the pathways and strategies that you're presenting at the end of July. Those will also have a set of collateral that's developed for them that we can also create and do additive engagement in the name with the support of council and subcommittee members, with A&R staff supporting those as well. And those will be in addition to the ones that are led, but not built around. So we can talk about what those are, and the public engagement plan will actually highlight a few opportunities that have already been brought to us where we can go to existing events and communicate our material. I also just want to highlight that there was a lot of consternation, and rightfully so, around the communication of a deliberation platform that wouldn't go out for vetting the climate action plan until after we've adopted the climate action plan on December 1st. So we're going to further dive into this next week, but we're thinking about either moving it earlier and thinking about how we use it earlier to inform the initial climate action plan, or B, if it doesn't go out until December after you all have adopted a climate action plan, thinking about how we put forward the work that we know is sort of part of this initial climate action plan that has to move into legislative action and rulemaking and therefore can't be deliberated on anymore. And B, the components of the climate action plan that could still need further refinement in this initial plan, and how we could communicate that suite of strategies and actions in a deliberation platform that's distinct from the components that we need to move forward with action on. So we're thinking about that still, but right for now it's shown as into December, but how we communicate what the intent of that is, we're thinking a lot about to ensure that we have buy-in for that initial plan adoption on December 1st, so that we can move into the other components of legislation and rulemaking. So that's really, those are the components that we're thinking about in refining with Climate Access and RISE, and that's really what I wanted to just share today, knowing that you all will have significant opportunity for feedback in the coming week or two. So I'll pause there.
Thanks, Jane. And you'll share some of this on Monday, right, Jane?
Yes.
Okay. Quick reactions, just conscious of time, but good reactions to this, questions for Jane on this? What's not clear? Lauren?
Thanks for sharing this, Jane. It's really helpful to have this, especially in a visual format as a visual learner. I think the only thing that might be missing, or a lingering question that I have, is about the results, key themes, whatever we're calling them, from those initial rounds of roundtables and interviews, and when that information and or data may be shared with the subcommittees to kind of inform our work as kind of the interim between a more robust public engagement process. I'd really love to see those, and I think we talked about those a bit, and Secretary Young might have even flagged that as part of an agenda for this meeting.
Those are in the public engagement plan, so that they'll come out on Wednesday. Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on this?
What's the thinking about the evaluation process? Or is that going to include additional public feedback? I assume we're going to get once the plan has been sent out. Is that right, Jane? So that the council have a chance to revisit what we produce?
Yes.
Great.
That's the intent of how it was crafted in their proposal, Climate Access and RISE. I really did want to talk through this all with you, but I think we're going to table this. But I want to let you know that I spent some time refining the milestones in order to think about what is coming for council and subcommittees, and trying to sketch out all of the meetings that we're now going to talk about. And I want to move to that so that we have time to process what's ahead of us for a meeting schedule. But let you know that this updated milestone graphic is linked now to today's agenda. It came late, but this is framing out what I envision the meetings will look like right now. Mind you, I'm sure it will change, but it's changed significantly since the last time I put this together based on understanding of where we are in the process, technical analysis, what else is needed for discussion and consideration. So happy to spend more time here, but mindful of time, I do just want to get to the sort of crux of the matter, is that Secretary Young rightfully pointed out to me that in order to change our meeting schedule, the council themselves will have to adopt this. And then in addition, some of the meetings, in addition to changing to a new regular schedule, I'm also suggesting some special meetings of both the steering committee and the climate council in order to meet our schedule. And so I think this isn't a surprise at this point, but I'm proposing that on September 13th that the climate council will move to a bi-weekly schedule after our August meeting. I'm also mindful that the statute requires us to adopt the climate action plan on December 1st, but December 1st is not a Monday. And so I'm suggesting that our regularly scheduled meeting would have us meeting on Monday, November 22nd, and I'm proposing a special meeting then on November 29th, but then also wanted you all to consider a question of do we also want to have another special meeting on December 1st itself, or in lieu of the 29th meeting, which is right after Thanksgiving. So that's one schedule to consider. And then I'll also just suggest that based on moving to a bi-weekly schedule for the Climate Council, the steering committee schedule will now be bi-weekly on Mondays, starting on September 20th. And I'm proposing from 10:30 to noon we'll meet, but recognizing that we'll also need to meet ahead of the September 13th meeting, and that the week before is Labor Day, that we'll have a special meeting due to Labor Day on August 30th. And then if we actually move to have two council meetings between November 22nd and November 29th, I'm just suggesting that we won't meet as a council in between, as a steering committee, I should say, in between those two meetings, unless you all want to skip Thanksgiving and we could just have Thanksgiving together, which is when that would be. So mindful, that's the proposed schedule. I ask you all to consider it and then suggest how we share it with the council.
Thanks, Jane. Any concerns about sharing this with the council and getting the council's official okay on this? Okay, great. All right, so we are very tight on.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Secretary.
Sorry, I had my hand raised. I have no problem sharing it with the full council, the council schedule, so they can, change the regular meeting. I mean, I'm a bit of a nudge about this because when we establish a regular meeting, that's what is posted. That's what the public is expecting. It's all on the state library website. So I do think we, as a steering committee, if we're going to start shifting our regular meetings, which I understand now are Mondays and Thursdays, that we just understand what we're shifting from to, and that we get all of that properly posted as regular meetings or special meetings, so the public has well in advance notice of when we're meeting. I don't know if we need to do that today or at our next steering committee meeting, but I think we need to adopt a regular meeting anyway.
We can do it right now, honestly. You all can say, yep, this looks good. We're adopting it as steering committee, and then we'll start the posting process and make sure it's all in advance.
Yeah. So we're moving from a Monday meeting. We're moving just the time for our bi-weekly Monday meetings. And then what are we doing with our Thursday meetings? This meeting today, are we keeping the Thursday meetings as regular?
I was under the
that's,
impression
I think, where we need clarification. So
it was my impression that this was all starting in September. Is that right, Jane, or no?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think you have time to tell us, what we're shifting from. We're canceling the Thursday regular meetings so we can take those off the public notice, And we're shifting our Monday meetings, regular meetings from 10:30 to 12. Is that essentially?
Yeah.
And then we're going to
Yeah,
have a special
starting
meeting
August
on the
30th.
30th. Okay. Well, you can work with Melissa. If everyone's good with this, maybe you could just work with Melissa or whoever's doing the postings now to change the regular schedule of meeting on the website.
Great. Lauren?
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Lauren?
Yeah, I would just flag it. I'm assuming questions will rise about in-person versus remote meetings in the fall. So just to have that on our radar, and that for people like our friend Chris Campany down in Southern Vermont, that we make sure that we build in enough buffer on either the beginning half of the day or the end of the day for travel for those meetings.
Yep. Yeah, I think as a question, we don't have time for it right now. Jane's already signaled in the council meetings which ones we're anticipating would be in person in the meeting invitations. I want to leave some time for public comment if anybody has been joining us, but before I do that, just anything else on this calendar issues? Okay. So why don't we just, I see a couple folks joining us that aren't steering committee members who've been listening in. Does anybody want to make a comment about our work today, who's been observing us in our meeting? We welcome anybody chiming in if there's something you want to say, either in the chat or verbally. Just go ahead and raise your hand, or so few of us, just open up your mic if you want to.
Hi, it's Rob Lamert.
Hey, Rob.
I'm not really certain that my comment really belongs in this particular setting, but I don't know where else to ask. There's no pathway for carbon removal anywhere in the plan, neither short-term nor long-term. And that is a divergence from the plans that are emerging on a federal level, as well as many states. And there's no pathway here for decarbonization of things like building materials. Concrete will hold sequestered carbon, and there's no reason for us to make concrete cement that is a major polluter. Same thing with asphalt. Asphalt made with biocarbon is more resilient, doesn't develop compression or the micro cracks that are associated with the asphalt that's made with fossil fuel materials. And we could get rid of the potholes at the same time as we are sequestering carbon, but there's no pathway whatsoever. Now, I wanted to point out that Oxford University published a set of guidelines for net zero offsetting, and they recommended the same zero emissions goals and transition to zero emissions fuels that you guys are all following. And that's very standard stuff, and it's been going on for a long time. But they also recognize that there are both short-term and long-term carbon sequestration tools available. And with all the pathways and the work that's gone into this program this far, there's been no discussion whatsoever. And I keep holding up my hand, but nobody is calling on me. And that's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you doing that. And I hope you join on Monday as well to look across when you see what's presented. Thanks for that comment. Anything else from folks who are listening in today? Okay, great. So we're a little bit past time, and I just want to be clear in terms of next steps for us as steering committee. Concretely, I don't know, Jane or Secretary Young, if there's specific things for us as a steering committee that we need to be paying attention to. Jane, can I start with you just real quick? What do we as a steering committee need to pay attention to coming up?
I think that we'll want to spend some significant time at our next meeting when we have the co-chairs present to consider how we're engaging the council to elevate the strategies and actions moving forward, and how we're going to have that prioritization conversation with the council. And then I also just want to reflect on Lauren's comment around scheduling and in-person meetings. I think that we should probably talk about that sooner rather than later in the process for that. Having been now at one subcommittee meeting that attempted an in-person meeting, but only 4 or 5 people came and the rest were still online, I can say that meetings that are half online and half in person are really ineffective. So I think are harder to be effective, I should say. And so we'll want to think about how we require or don't require, how we make it accessible for as many folks to join in person, if that's the path we're taking.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah.
Which one was that, Jane?
Rural Resilience had an in-person meeting last week.
Okay, so definitely let's put that high on our agenda for our next conversation. We'll see everybody on Monday. I'll make the changes to the agenda based on what we talked about today. Anything else before we close up?
If anybody's doing a rain dance in southern Vermont, they can stop now. We've got enough.
Doing okay. All right. Anything else, Secretary Young? Anything from you? Hang on. You gotta take your phone off mute or something here. Or your no, the system off, the Zoom off mute, and your phone off mute. The double mutes when you're calling with your phone. So it's one of these days.
No, I'm all set.
Excellent. Thanks.
I'm going to join Jane in the Zoom challenge category, I guess. I'm good.
Okay.
I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. I hope you have a nice dry weekend, Chris, especially.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We'll see you Monday. Take care. All the best.
Everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.